Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Maybe we'll wait another minute or so to see more attendees trickle in. Nice to see a lot of names, both known and unknown in the attendee list. Before we begin the formal presentation, I'd like to walk you through some of the features of this webinar. If you have a problem, please use the questions field on the side of your screen, and we'll try to help you with any technical difficulties or queries. We'd also like to encourage you to ask us any questions. To do so, please use the same question field at the side of your screen. Feel free to use this throughout the webinar, and we'll try and get to as many questions as possible during our time together. You will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording of the webinar, and there is a handout section in the control panel for the handouts from today's session. And lastly, at the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey. We would appreciate it if you take a moment and provide us with some feedback on the session today. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to have you here. I think we've all attended many webinars this year, but we wanted to finish 2021 with a fun one. The topic of the Metaverse is a hot one these days. If you hadn't heard of it before, I'm sure Facebook's name change to Meta has brought it to your attention. There are various estimates of the worth of the Metaverse market, but even the most conservative ones are in the multi-trillion range. Before we move on, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Andrea Davis, and I'm a patent information professional with over 20 years experience in the field. I am the managing director of Botkin IP, a patent search and analytics firm that I founded 4.5 years ago. But I also worked in the corporate world and at a couple of search firms earlier in my career. I specialize in medical devices, 3D printing, sports tech, and just general mechanical domain. I am honored to be the host of this webinar featuring Tony Tripping. I have known Tony for more than a decade and have immense respect for his expertise in patent analytics. Tony has coined the term Patinformatics, which is also the name of his advisory firm. He wrote the guidelines for the preparation of patent landscape reports for WIPO, and most recently, he founded ML4Patents.com, the industry's online resource for the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in the field of intellectual property. So what is the Metaverse? Zuckerberg has described it as a virtual environment you can go inside of instead of just looking at on a screen. Basically, it's a world of interconnected virtual communities where people can meet, work, and play using virtual reality headsets, augmented reality glasses, smartphone apps, or other devices. Zuckerberg has also said that it will be like teleporting from one experience to another, that it should feel like you're embedded in a place with a sense of presence, the feeling that you're transported somewhere. That makes me super interested, as teleportation is my favorite superpower that I always dreamed of using. Despite Mark Zuckerberg's efforts to brand it as his own, the Metaverse is not a new idea, actually. Neil Stephenson coined the term in his seminal 1992 novel Snow Crash, and several books and movies have described the concept. In some ways, the Metaverse is already an impactful existing universe. In the past week alone, there has been land sales to a total of $100 million and 2 record sales, a $2.5 million parcel of land in Decentraland and the 4.3 million real estate property in the Sandbox. Snoop Dogg is an active participant and is creating his own subworld called Snoopverse in the Sandbox. And in fact, somebody just became his neighbor by buying a virtual plot next to Snoop for the bargain of $450,000. We also have MetaSoccer, the first blockchain-based soccer metaverse where users can create their own club and generate income while playing, so-called play to earn, as they participate full-time as club owners and managers. And there is also Budverse and from Budweiser and Tinderverse. Zuckerberg has made it quite clear that the future of Facebook is the metaverse. Their Horizon umbrella platform will have Horizon Home, which will be like a home base where you can invite people to come and see you. Horizon Workrooms for productivity, Horizon Worlds for exploring, and Horizon Venues for concerts, sports, and other live events. And Facebook is not just making verbal promises and predictions. Looking at their acquisitions in the past few years, they are certainly putting their money to achieve their stated goals. It might have started with the Oculus acquisition back in 2014 for $2 billion. And most recently, they bought Within, the company that developed the virtual reality workout app, Supernatural, selected as one of the best inventions in 2020 by Time magazine. Organized under the umbrella of Facebook Reality Labs, there are nearly 10,000 people working on these technologies. It's almost 20% of the company's workforce. Facebook also announced plans to hire another 10,000 developers in the European Union to work on its metaverse computing platform. Facebook Reality Labs publicized projects include Project Aria, which seeks to create live 3D maps of public spaces and enable the use of AR glasses that can detect road hazards, offer up stats during a business meeting, help you find your keys, and enable calling a friend and seeing their lifelike avatar across the table. Or you can watch virtual TV anywhere you'd like, basically projected on any wall or anywhere you are outdoors and watch TV. There is also the recently released Ray-Ban Stories. It's a Facebook integrated sunglasses with 5-megapixel cameras and voice control. These Ray-Bans don't have the displays and the lenses like the latest and somewhat similar Snapchat spectacles, but speakers on both sides of the frame can play sound from your phone over Bluetooth, allowing you to take a call or listen to a podcast. A touchpad built into the side of the frame lets you change the volume or play and pause what you're hearing. The photos or videos captured can, of course, be shared on Facebook or any other apps. And it doesn't end there. They have also done a lot of other deals that support a strong metaverse presence, such as Unit 2 Games, which makes a collaborative game creation platform called Creta, Big Box VR, that makes a popular game for Facebook Oculus, and Downpour Interactive, another VR game maker. Facebook has been vocal about painting a future where virtual reality and augmented reality take leading spots. But will it be able to dominate the space? Who are the other players? What does the patent data show us? I will let Tony take a deep dive into this world using patent data as his basis of exploration. Tony, you have the stage. or better said, you have the screen and the microphone.
Yeah, the floor, the stage. It's almost our own little metaverse right here, because you know it's all like virtual and whatnot.
That's
Wish it
right.
could be in person. That's always a lot more fun with getting to meet everybody. So thank you, Andrea, for that wonderful introduction. You've done a fantastic job really kind of scoping what it is that we're talking about here, because that's one of the big problems when you're working with emerging technologies is really getting a grasp of what it is that we're actually talking about. So next slide, please. So that was the biggest question when I was first asked to do this. So this all comes from an article that I was doing for Forbes. All right. So my editor said, hey, there's this big announcement about this big investment, and Facebook is talking about this thing called the Metaverse. What's going on? So then that's where I got started. I said, okay, well, let me go ahead and start looking into. I mean, my son has an Oculus. You know, I've used it. It's cool. You know, it seems like it's mostly for gaming. It was a little bit hard to imagine. And of course, we know about there was another online platform where, and it was several years ago, where people were getting really excited about meeting online and having, you know, virtual storefronts and things like that. And it's just really fizzled out, you know, really quickly. So was this hype, or is there something really behind this? So when it comes to building patent collections, usually it's a bit of trial and error. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about Second Life. Thank you, Scott Herzog. Scott just put in Second Life. That's the one. That's the one I'm talking about. Also, by the way, for those of you who are trying to download the handout for my IAM 300 strategy profile, it doesn't seem to be working for whatever reason. Tried re-uploading it, don't know why. If you're really interested in seeing it, I'm happy to send it to you by email. Otherwise, it's mostly all on LinkedIn. So please, in any event. So if you just started, I mean, and this is something that the professional patent searchers, I think, have to struggle with a fair amount, is people who want to just go to a patent database and treat it like it's Google. So I'll just type in the word metaverse, okay? And that's obviously going to bring me back what I'm looking for, right? Well, you can do that. You know, I went over to Derwent Innovation, and I typed in metaverse or meta space verse, as it were, and I got a whopping 131 worldwide records and 80 DWPI families. You know, it's funny too, because this was a lot like when I was looking up COVID-19 a year and a half ago. The idea that you could actually search for COVID, it wasn't going to work. It didn't work. That's not a parlance that people were using up to that point. So you needed to find other methods. So what I did do, all right, is I said, all right, well, since we're talking about Facebook, that's the company that I'm being asked to sort of write about. Let's start with a query. CMP is a corporate tree. So that's the opportunity to look for alternate names and companies they've bought, things like that. It's a corporate tree for Facebook or Sonics, or PA, patent assignee, for Facebook, or a Derwent code for Facebook, which in this case is FABK-C, or a reassignment where Facebook is the company that the patent is being assigned to for Facebook. So this is a typical company search. So for those of you looking like, wait a second, how come you got all those different fields and all those different things? Well, sometimes that's what it takes to find or do a comprehensive patent search when it comes to looking for companies. And then, you know, I'm really fond of title, abstract, and claims. I don't like using the specification. I don't like normally for patent searches because it's too easy for the records to go off field. So I was just looking for virtual or augmented adjacent to reality. Now, if I was really serious, I might put a near 5, you know, so it's probably not that big of a deal in this case, but you can imagine if there were a couple of words in between virtual and reality. I mean, I could have spent some more time with building out a hedge, but that really wasn't my objective. But I did find in this particular case, with this particular query, almost 2,600 worldwide records in just over 1,000 DWPI families, which is better. You know, it's better than 80, but still probably not quite what we're looking for. All right, it's probably not quite comprehensive yet. But now I have some really solid records. And then finally what I did, and I guess I put that on the next part of the slide, be a good idea to look at Oculus. Oculus is a pure play. there's a very high likelihood that the vast majority of what the Oculus portfolio is going to contain is going to be associated with this idea of metaverse technologies, okay? And at that point then, yeah, it's okay to stay on this slide. It was time for me to take all these accumulated records that I put together thus far and start looking for what were the major CPC and IPC codes, these patent classification codes that were used to talk about these patents that are on fairly specific augmented reality, virtual reality, Oculus portfolio. And this is what came out. The vast majority of all of the families coming from those two strategies fall into these three broad categories. G06, F3, 11, which are arrangements for interaction with the human body, example for user immersion in virtual reality. Okay, so in the rest of the slides, you'll see this as computer interaction with human body. Okay, and that's sort of our virtual reality component. Another big thing, optical systems that are head mounted. All right, so these are likely to be the goggles or the eyeglasses or the variety of hardware that is associated with virtual or augmented reality. And finally, manipulating 3D models or images for computer graphics, especially navigation within 3D models or images. And so I can tell you now, Metaverse in this particular sense, in this particular presentation, does not include NFTs. It does not include cryptocurrency. It doesn't cover e-commerce. All right, so there are a variety of other things that theoretically could have been included, but I was trying to keep it to, and even so, with next slide, with just these three broad categories, I ended up with 250,000 worldwide records in 99,000 DWPI families. It's already an enormous collection, which is far too many to analyze within just about any system. Most systems have some sort of limit with regards to how many families you can work with, how many families you can save, how many things you can analyze. And so when you start to get up there in these hundreds of thousands of records, it becomes very, very difficult. But I kind of hacked my way through it by basically looking at the number of families per year based on the total worldwide records for the year and then basically dividing. And when I did that, I came up with this particular projection as far as the growth of this particular area. And you can see it's a pretty solid vertical line with an even slope, and so it's just continued interest in the area. And 2021, by the way, is on there, but it's projected. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. I did something very simple, basically taking the number of months we'd been up to through there, dividing it by that, multiplying by 12. It's not a difficult projection. But then I started to say, well, I can't work with everything. I can't do anything with 100,000 families. That's just not going to fly. And so I developed a mechanism by which I could identify the top 10 companies. All right. And so I started to build a collection by basically doing individual searches for these top 10 companies and pulling those down to a point where I could put something into Excel and start putting together a table like this. You'll see the note on the bottom that this represents a little over 16,000 families that represent the top 10. So at 99,000, these top 10 companies are coming in at about 15% of the total number. And when I have something like this, I can actually do much more precise work because I don't have to speculate. I don't have to project so much. I can actually say, well, these are the numbers for these years. And so this is the projection over time when you look at the top 10 companies. You'll notice that it's a similar, the slope is not quite as high, but it is a very similar looking graph to the one that we saw on the previous slide. So clearly, there is a tremendous amount going on. There's a tremendous amount of continued research that's going on. And especially over the last 5 years, the area has really taken off. So next slide. So that's a little bit about how we built this. And there's a question here. And so I want to try, did you also use the subgroups for main group G06T19? Yes, absolutely. That's why they're on the slide. Anything that I had on the slide, when I put together the strategy, all of those individual subgroups were ordered together. So yes, absolutely. So I definitely put all of those in there. Okay, so now what we've got is, these are those top 10 companies, okay? And some people may have noticed in my LinkedIn discussion that I was a little bit provocative and said that Sony had the most. And I guess you can argue they do. I mean, that's what they have the highest bar on this chart. And it's often very, very useful when you're doing patent analytics to start stacking information. And so this is an opportunity to stack some information. I could have just put one colored bar and say, okay, Sony has the most. But I thought it would be interesting to look at who had the most over the last 5 years. So you'll notice that this chart is divided. It's a what's called a stack column. Blue is the last 5 years, and orange, or similar color that you're seeing on your screen, is the previous 10. So this is 15 years cumulative, but broken up based on the earliest publication year of when this particular patent family was first published on. And so you can see, if you take a look at just the blue bars, that Facebook has just edged out the other top 3, top 4 companies if you were only looking at the last 5 years. And also, very importantly, from a graph like this, you can see the relative percentages of the last 5 years versus the previous 10. And so you see Magic Leap, Apple, IBM, with very high percentages over the last 5 years. And that's a very critical piece of information because I think it really speaks to the ongoing and very active programs that those companies have, and their interest in bringing this to market sooner than later, and covering their technology space with as many patents as possible. Next slide. Okay. Now, once again, any of these pieces of information all by themselves, I don't think gives you a pretty clear picture of what's going on. But when you start to look at different views, you start to see a little bit more about what's going on. And so this, for instance, shows you the last 5 years of Facebook, Sony, and Samsung. All right, and you can see how Samsung is for all intents and purposes, pretty flat. Okay, they actually had the most in 2016, and they've pretty much they've sort of recovered at 2020, about the same level as 2016, but then they dipped a little bit and kept fairly flat. While Sony, who of course we're saying was the #1 company, actually had a decline between 2019 and 2020. Meanwhile, there we go. We see Facebook. That if you looked at just 2020 alone, you didn't even look at just the past 5 years. If you looked at 2020 alone, much higher than either Sony or Samsung. Next slide, please. And the same thing can be said, generally speaking, for Microsoft. Now, it's important to keep in mind, of course, that both Sony and Microsoft have gaming platforms, and the PlayStation at least has a VR headset. Okay, and so Sony is absolutely going to be involved with this because they're already there. They already have a headset to go along with their PlayStation. And then Google is funny. This is when you see a trend like this where it kind of goes up and down, kind of cycles. It signals typically some sort of they're not quite sure what they're doing yet. I would suggest that there's not a strong strategy yet. There's an interest, there's a desire. There's undoubtedly a fair amount of research, but I can't say from this data that I see a definitive plan, that they clearly understand a direction that they want to go in when I see a graph like this. Next slide, please. Now we get to the companies that I think are a little more interesting. And I just picked these, I put these in the order that they were over the last 5 years. And so it's almost, and plus the scale. You always got to be careful with time graphs, because the scale on some of the previous slides is much higher, 400, 500, compared that to 200. And so you start losing the lines with the smaller numbers down towards the bottom as the ones start to climb up to the top, and you sort of bleed them out. So I tend to separate them out a little bit so that you can clearly see the trends. And there you see it, Apple and Magic Leap following a similar trajectory as Facebook. And so in the Forbes article, for instance, that's what I actually wrote. I mean, I would, if I was going to call a winner, I'd say Facebook as a strong contender, but I would not be calling out, I would not say that Apple and Magic Leap are out of it by any stretch. I think that those two companies in particular have a great chance, have a very strong chance of competing very, very much with Facebook or Meta, and that they are just as likely to be as successful. Magic Leap tends to focus on business, and Apple tends to focus on consumer. And I must have read half a dozen articles this week about Apple hiring more people, about Apple, the projection that their VR headset is going to be out in 2024, with the eyeglasses following in 2025. That was announced this week, or speculated on this week, and that wasn't announced. And that they're hiring people in Cupertino who are tasked with designing a next generation VR experience. So as Apple does in Apple fashion, they're taking the initial thought and the initial push into a technology area, and they're clearly thinking about how they're going to make it more readily available, more readily adaptable, and more easily usable to a higher percentage of the people out there. And we can see that their investment in technology and the number of patents they're filing is commensurate with a high level of interest. Next slide, please. Now, I went to the trouble of finding those 3 different categories. Okay, you notice I've got head-mounted optical, I've got manipulating 3D models, and I've got computer interaction with the body. All right, and so we can keep those as you can call them categories, you can call them pivot points. There's a variety, but all good landscape reports usually have a additional point of context associated with them. They've got just saying who's got how many and how many over time. It's useful, it's interesting, but it's just one small piece of a bigger puzzle. And so if you can start to break it down into who is interested in what areas and when they were interested in those areas, I think you start to get a much clearer picture of what's happening and where their real interest lies. And the fascinating thing about this particular topic is how similar all 3 of these are. It's a little bit shocking, actually. You can see that the computer interaction with the body is slightly larger, okay, but the slopes are about the same, which is very, very interesting. They all came from about the same place, really beginning to emerge in 2010. All right, but the actual, if you broke up the 16,000, it's almost equally distributed. And now, of course, there's some patents are in multiple classes. Okay, so that's what one of the notes at the bottom. Documents may appear in more than one category. It's important as an analyst to make sure that you're telling people about your analyses with regards to, could a document only go in one bucket or one category, or it could only be represented by one item, or could it be across a couple of them? Because of course, if somebody went to the trouble to count some of these things up, they would find that this would equal far more than 16,000. And that's because, of course, some of the families can be in multiple categories. Okay, and so this is very, very interesting in my mind that you're seeing this very much of a tie-in with all 3 of these technologies. All of them seem to be very important and interrelated and used simultaneously when you're talking about these sort of metaverse technologies, which I think is going to be an important thing for people to think about. And if you take anything away from this, maybe that's something that you're going to take away, that if I'm interested in the metaverse in the future, I just don't want to look for virtual reality. I also want to look for manipulating computer models. I want to look at some various other aspects of this besides maybe the first one that kind of gets thrown at you or jumps out at you. And it is interesting a little bit in this case that you're seeing the drop off a tiny bit on the so-called virtual reality one. So you can see the gray bar has started to come down a little bit, but it's hard to say because it was real. It went from, in 2019, it did go down a little bit for 2020, and 2021 is a projection. So you can't put too much into that, but it is interesting that one's gone down a little bit while the other 2 have continued to rise. All right, next slide, please. Now, I love these sorts of charts. Now I'm going to show a spatial concept map at the end too, which these 2 types of analyses are very much similar to one another. Ordinarily, they should tell a similar story. They should provide you with similar types of information. The spatial concept map can sometimes get more granular because it can provide additional categories besides 3, like we have in this case. But generally speaking, what you see on the map should be pretty similar to what you're seeing in these kind of charts. And so the first one here again, and they're organized based on the relative sizes of the portfolio so that you don't blow out. I mean, you can see it actually. The one on the left, the top bar is 1600. the one in the middle, the top bar is 1200, and then the one on the far right is really topping out at 700. And so while these lines look similar, you're talking about a very different size if we were to put them all on the same one. You know, the ones on the right would be much smaller if they were being compared directly to Sony, Microsoft, and Samsung, who have the three largest portfolios over this particular time period. So again, another thing to keep in mind, another thing, I mean, you want, and that's why arguably you might even put them on three different slides so that people wouldn't draw the conclusions and not bother to look at the side, to look at how large the bars are actually. So, but in any case, it's really pretty interesting here that how much each of these companies, I mean, IBM is almost exclusively one where they're far more interested in the computer interaction, sort of the hardware aspect, than they are with the optical. So clearly they're interested in virtual reality type spaces and manipulating 3D models, but maybe not so much in an actual headset. All right, and so I guess that would kind of go along with IBM. IBM's not necessarily known as a hardware innovator. And so I guess it wouldn't be, it might be a little bit surprising actually if we actually got an IBM glasses, you know, big blue glasses. There we made up the name. So it's big blue glasses. But again, if you look over, and similarly, the fact that Sony and Microsoft are pretty similar, I think is very telling. I mean, again, this speaks to their interest in this for gaming. All right, and so that the relative, now of course, Sony is a little higher in the manipulating of 3D models than Microsoft, and you know, once again, that might be due to the fact that they actually have the VR headset, and so they have to have an interface for actually interacting with that 3D environment. Meanwhile, Microsoft doesn't have that yet per se. I'm sure they're developing it, but they're not quite there at the same place. And meanwhile, Samsung, you know, looks a little bit more like, you know, an IBM, for instance. And then you look at Canon, and Canon is really fascinating. You don't know you never hear anything at all about Canon. I mean, Canon makes cameras, okay, but by the same token, your cameras are visual technologies, and so they clearly are interested in the area, and their particular interest seems to be much more about creating 3D spaces than it is necessarily about creating a headset or even, you know, developing virtual reality instances at all. And then you look at the company, of course, we all got started on this, and you see the dominance of the head-mounted optical. Okay, you'll see this reflecting in the spatial concept map as well, but you can clearly see that they have less experience in the building of the 3D models than they do actually working with the headset or working with the virtual reality space and the interaction as far as the body is concerned. And so I think that's also very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense considering who they've bought, and it would suggest that they're likely to buy more companies that are actually going to be concentrating on the environment. And we've already seen that. Andrea talked about one of the companies they bought recently, and their focus is not on hardware. Their focus is on the environment. And so that's clearly an area that they're going to want to continue to bulk themselves up on. And then when you look at Apple and Magic Leap, Apple is looking at interactions with all sorts of different things. The wristwatch, you know, there's a smartphone. I mean, there's lots of different tactile and haptic interactions that you're going to see coming out of Apple that is making them a little bit more pronounced in that area. And they've got a strong background in software and things of that nature, and so their orange bar is pretty high. And then I think that the head-mounted optical is something that they're just beginning to get more involved with. And so if we looked at that over time, I think you'll see some changes there. And then finally, Magic Leap, a very balanced portfolio. This is part of the reason I like them, with an emphasis on the head-mounted optical. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, once again, I think it's very interesting to look at these over time, though. To look at the bar by itself says one thing, But to look at it over time tells you whether or not it was something they've gotten into and then gotten out of, or it's something it just happens to be small, but it's got a huge slope. It's, you know, it's something that's very, very you know, big recent influence for them. And what you see here is exactly what you'd sort of expect. I mean, Facebook is beginning to get more into the manipulating of the 3D models. Okay, while they had already gotten, you know, by 2019, head-mounted optical was already fairly high and headed higher. You know, between 2019 and 2020, you know, there's an uptick, but not a huge uptick, and it's projected to be an even larger uptick in 2021. So they're clearly, again, starting to move in that direction. Sony, on the other hand, seems to have hit a bit of a lull. Okay, you can see that 2019 was a peak, and all three areas went down for 2020. And there was even a changing of the guard, as it were, where 3D models was higher. Excuse me, that the computer interaction was with the body was higher, but then for 2020 that was surpassed by the manipulation of 3D models. And projecting for 2001, that trend is slated to continue. Next slide. Microsoft, interesting because it's a very even distribution, and all of them are headed down. They were started down in 2018, and they're projected to continue to be down even further for 2021. Do not expect this to stay that way. They are definitely going to rebound, and they have already made their announcements about bringing Metaverse technologies to Teams. So they're clearly on board with this, and of course we've got an 18-month publication lag that is not necessarily reflected in the 2021 data here. So you can expect, I can guarantee you that this is going to slope up very, very quickly. And the same thing with Google. All right, so you see that while these companies have large portfolios, it's difficult to say that they're terribly active. And so, you know, there's a little bit of transitioning between the categories, but overall, they're all about the same, and they're all kind of trending downward. And their 2021 projection is quite small compared with what they were doing back in 2019, for instance. Next slide. Meanwhile, our two darlings, our so-called Facebook competitors. And you can see, again, very balanced portfolios, very organic work in all of the areas that are likely to be important to contributing to metaverse technology of this type, and all of them trending upwards. Okay, next slide, please. Now, an alternative method for looking at technologies and trying to establish which companies are interested in which areas is by using something called a spatial concept map. These go by a variety of different terms. They're called various things on different platforms. Just to genericize it, I call them spatial concept maps. But the idea behind a map like this is that you feed it, say, titles and abstracts, and the system analyzes the words and creates a vector for each of these families, and then compares them to one another and looks to chart them on a map like this in 2 dimensions. All right. So we could get into a lot more details, but I'll spare you all of the ideas of what goes into making a spatial concept map. The important thing in this case, though, is that with this particular piece of software that I'm using, it's really cool because I can weight the different fields. So for instance, in these particular maps, the Derwent title is given the highest weight. The English title is given the next amount of weight. The Derwent abstract is given a lower weight. And then finally, the source abstract is given a 4th weight. So if I were to give them numbers, I might call the top one a 10, second one an 8, third one 6, and the final one 4. That gives me the ability as an analyst to pick and choose which parts of the documents I'm analyzing are likely to be more important or should be weighted more heavily when it's building its similarity scores. Now, I know this is difficult to interpret. As a matter of fact, it's nearly meaningless. And the reason for that is that it's unbelievable. I've never seen a map like this. I mean, if you look at the caption, this is 8,500. I didn't include all 10 companies. I only included Facebook, Sony, Microsoft, Apple, and Magic Leap. okay? But every single one of them just about is in every single area. You don't see any real emergence or any huge areas of differentiation. That's almost a first for me, especially with this big of a collection. To have them all stacked up on top of each other like this is very, very unusual. Now you can see the predominance of blue down towards the lower left. That's clearly the head-mounted optical area. You're clearly seeing lenses. You're clearly seeing, that's all about the headset, whether it's the glasses or it's the goggles. That lower left is absolutely where that's happening. But you notice up above it a little bit, finger sensor detection, and the predominance of red there. That's your Apple, and that's the interaction with the wristwatch. That's the interaction with the haptic feedback, possibly gloves, various other aspects of things like that. And then down at the bottom, you've got, Magic Leap looking at the sound warping and vibration, that they're beginning to potentially bring an audio aspect to this, and an audio sensation that's going to be part of this virtual reality type environment. And then the other thing that sort of stood out to me is the Sony with the big spot of yellow down there with the information processing and image. This suggests that Sony, with the advanced hardware that they've put into a PS5, has spent a lot of time thinking about how to crunch an enormous amount of visual data, and not so much visual as in what you see with your eyes, but I'm talking about like images and rendering and creating these amazing 3D type landscapes, and being able to do that with processing power and do it so that you get these high frame rates. Okay, so that's what I'm seeing as what that predominantly yellow area means as far as Sony's concerned. Next slide. In order to try and break this up a little bit, I also included, say, for instance, Facebook versus Apple. Okay, and this gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. There's coverage everywhere by everybody. This is unheard of. I've never, in all of the landscapes that I've ever done and any of the spatial concept maps I've ever created, I rarely ever see this much dominance across and overlap between companies like this. You can refer to my quantum computing report, and when you look at the qubit generation section, clear delineations between the companies that do topological qubits versus those that do semiconducting loops. And you can see it very nicely in the ion trap work, and this company does this one does. In this case, everybody is interested in this entire collection, which also, I guess it should say, it provides some comfort to me. I mean, I feel like I've picked the right codes. That's another thing that this seems to suggest to me, that I think I've got a pretty decent strategy for looking at least the aspects of the metaverse that involve, the headsets and the virtual reality environments and the augmented reality. Again, I didn't even try to look into NFTs or cryptocurrency or any of those other things. But it looks like I think we've got a pretty good handle on how to identify key players in these particular sub-technology areas. Okay. All right. Well, there's a question. Yeah. So the next slide, I think, actually brings us back to you.
Yes. Yeah. So this is incredible, Tony. The amount of art that is in there is astounding, and to only see such few classification subclasses, it's pretty incredible. And I'm assuming we will. I'm not assuming, but I'm hoping that at some point soon there will be a reclassification done in that area with more granular subsets, because searching this area is not easy today. And it will only get more and more complex. So
yeah, that was certainly what happened with quantum. Eventually, quantum ended up all under G06 and 10. Mm-hmm. So they eventually just opened up a whole new category for it. So
how long did that take from when sort of the technology started becoming more popular to when they did the reclassification?
Yeah, it seems like it was about 3 years. 3 years. Yeah, the inflection point for quantum started in 2012, and then and it really started to ramp up by 2015, and then in the 2018 time period, you got the new categorization for quantum computing all by itself.
And this is, I would say, even more massive. So I'm hoping they're not going to wait 3 years to do that. So other than the 10 companies that we focused on, or Tony focused on for this analysis, there will undoubtedly be others that will grow from providing essential supporting technology. NVIDIA is such a company. They manufacture, of course, powerful graphic chips and should be among the biggest winners in the metaverse. The company's Omniverse platform is a piece of the metaverse that's already available. It's a 3D simulation and collaboration platform. And it actually enables various designers to create their own virtual 3D worlds that obey the laws of physics in the real world or not. Another one is Unity Software, content development platform that enables developers to create these immersive and interactive 2D and 3D platform agnostic games. So they could be then used in any of the verse platforms. The company's game engine is used to develop today 70% of the top mobile games and by 94 of the leading 100 game studios in the world. Additionally, Unity Software also powers other 3D experiences in industrial and commercial use cases such as training, robotics, and simulation. And those are also areas that will explode in the next few years. Unity's acquisition of leading visual effects tools and technology player Weta Digital for $1.6 billion highlights the company's commitment towards the metaverse. Weta Digital has been involved in creating visual effects for major blockbusters such as Avatar and Lord of the Rings. Qualcomm thinks that the metaverse opportunity could even grow as big as the smartphone industry is today. And they're banking on Snapdragon, their chipset platform, to play a crucial role in the development of technology. For a long time, of course, Qualcomm's strength has been hardware, but through Snapdragon Spaces, the company is creating the software foundation for the metaverse, a sort of a bridge that connects future phones with future smart glasses. Its Snapdragon XR2 chip is already powering a number of various headsets like the Oculus Quest 2, the Microsoft HoloLens 2, and the HTC Vive Focus 3. And some big companies like Lenovo, T-Mobile, and Motorola have already expressed their interest in using the Snapdragon Spaces. So these are just a few of the companies that will ride on sort of the metaverse wave that caused by the players that Tony highlighted. We are seeing incredible advances already in the surgical field and education, surgical robotics. So it's definitely an exciting area, an exciting near future that we are about to see. So we're open to any questions that you might have. Please, again, put them into the question part of the screen, and we're happy to get to them if you'd like.
Thank you very much, everybody, for the vast majority of people who signed in early have continued to stay with us. There's one question about what's my take. So my take generally is Facebook is not one. I think that's this was a big thing, even with quantum computing. Quantum computing, everybody was ready to give Google the crown. Just because they've got these great PR departments, and not that they're not doing great work, they are, but the PR becomes the reality. And Google was just like, yeah, we've achieved quantum dominance and we've supremacy and we're this and we're that and we're, everybody else should just go home. We figured this out. And the reality is that it isn't the case at all. There's a lot of other companies in that particular space that are making great contributions, doing very well, and are likely to be major players. And the same thing is happening here. I really think that Apple is going to give Facebook a run for its money in the consumer space. And I believe that there are a lot of companies who are going to be wanting to work with Magic Leap. because they're concerned about Facebook and some of their privacy concerns and some of the issues that company, the baggage that company is bringing along with it. Well, Magic Leap is a pure play business. And so if I was looking for a pure play business solution for incorporating these sorts of technologies into my training videos, my onboarding, my team spaces, I mean, Microsoft is okay there. I mean, because of course they have such a strong presence with Office. But Magic Leap, I think, is really going to give Facebook a run for its money, and they've already raised. Their last round of funding was enormous. I believe it was something on the order of more than $50 million in their last round.
Do you think there's an acquisition opportunity in Magic Leap?
It could be. I don't think they will. I mean, I think this is a lot like what you saw, and I can't remember the name of the company, but there was one stalwart company that Facebook offered them a couple $2 billion, and they said no. I don't remember the names of that, but they're like, no, we think this has got this. I think this can go higher, and so they're going to hold out. I don't think anybody on the Magic Leap board would be super excited, even if there was outrageous money, because they've put a lot of work and obviously a huge R&D effort to show up in the top 10 in this. And that's the other thing about this. I only looked at the top 10. There's lots and lots of other companies with hundreds and hundreds, thousands of documents. I just couldn't see because of the overall size of this collection. Ordinarily, I might go down to the top 25 or the top 50, or I'd start poking around for little gems that have emerged over the last 2 years, for instance, but have like these really exciting growing portfolios. So other work that could be done. How long did this take you? Okay, well, it depends. The first part of it, for what I wrote for Forbes, I hobbled together in about 8 hours. But I'll be the first to admit that while it held up, when I went back to do it with a little more rigor, it was a bit of a hack job. Again, I spent a lot of time with my collections trying to figure out how I'm going to make everything work and how I'm going to meet the constraints that I have based on the tools I have access to. So all told, because this is only at the top 10, I didn't have to spend so much time on assignee cleanup, for instance, which takes a bunch of time. If there have been more granular categories, I think if a client asked me to do this project, it's probably a 30 to 60 hour project. And I'd have to speak with the client about exactly what was in scope and what wasn't. I think that's still a big part of what we're talking about here is well, what exactly do you want included? Do you want AI hardware? Okay, which is where the NVIDIA stuff came in. Unity may not be a huge patenter, although they definitely, with the Unreal Engine, have a huge presence in the space. So, like I said, I'd say it's probably a 30 to 60 hour project.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I think one of the values of this presentation and your analysis, Tony, is that you actually explain how you did it. It's rare than when we have a patent analytics sort of webinar, we get to see the details behind it. So thank you for doing that. We have another question from Marie-Pierre Vidon. Do you find patents linked with application for facial recognition?
Yeah, and that's an area that wouldn't have been included here. Again, going back to the idea that it wasn't necessarily an area of interest for Facebook or Oculus, which was sort of the key foundational collection that led to the selection of the corresponding CPC codes. If I was talking with a client and we were talking a little bit more about things like facial recognition or various other biometrics, then yeah, that is certainly something that I think is relevant and could be included.
All right, another question from Romain Vidal. Many companies do not even file patent applications in this space. For example, the open source community. And he's thinking that it's quite difficult to have a clear vision on the actual major actors in this space. What do you think, Tony?
Okay, so you may in fact be very much correct, but because of the hardware association, I find it very difficult to think that there's going to be much in the way of open source. Hardware related items, those guys patent like crazy. I mean, even if you look, Facebook once upon a time didn't do patents at all, and now they're huge. They file all the time, and Microsoft didn't do any at all. Now they're huge. There's story after story after story about companies that didn't think they needed to compete or at least be involved with the technology market by taking advantage of patents, and then all of a sudden they do these huge catch-ups. And so I can't imagine that there's going to be some open source group out there somewhere that there's going to be a Linux or something like that that's going to end up being a major player or a major influence. I think this is the hardware people. I think this is a patent play, and you're going to see a lot of patents in this space.
Yeah, I think the market is way too valuable, and there's too much money to just have it in open source. Not that there won't be some, of course there will be, but the important parts will be patented for sure.
Yeah, exactly. There's way too much on the line to risk people being able to just take and use it as they will.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we have a couple of thank you messages, and absolutely, I do appreciate, Tony, your insights and your thorough analysis and being so transparent about how you did it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to check out the handout section, and have a great holiday season.
Yeah, happy holidays, everybody. I'd sing you a Christmas carol, but you guys have been so patient so far. So, but really, to you and yours, happy holidays, and best wishes, fantastic luck, and many opportunities for 2022. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everyone.